I'm going to present the PowerPoint here momentarily, and then I can walk us through the preview. All right. So as the title states, this is a community budget preview. All right. So a couple of things before we dive into it, because rescue plan. Now, when they initially announced this 2 months ago, the feds projected that we might be eligible for up to $64 million, and the Treasury Department, the Federal Treasury Department, has since projected that down to $59.5 million. Mind you, it's $59.5 million of federal stimulus money directly to local government. So this is the first of its kind during this pandemic. All the prior stimulus packages have gone through various sectors of the country, of the economy, the community, what have you. This is the first one where there was a bucket of money for local government. So we're very grateful to our representatives in Congress and to the new administration in the White House. Um, Again, we expect to receive between this year and next year up to $59.5 million. Now, what is the money for and what can it be used for? And also, most importantly, as you can see here, highlighted in red, it is one-time funding. In other words, we should not utilize these funds for any sort of ongoing expenses. Now, in terms of what it's for, there are 6 broad categories that they laid out. There's a 150-page document with guidance with the fine print, which we are studying, and we will be making recommendations to the City Council in upcoming months about how best to utilize these funds. But you can see the 6 broad categories: supporting public health responses, replacing public sector revenue that was lost, making investments in water and sewer and broadband infrastructure, providing premium pay for essential workers, as well as addressing the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. So we'll look forward to making those recommendations to the City Council. This money is coming too late in the game for us to pre-program into the upcoming budget. I need to have more policy direction from the council, again, because these are special funds, because it's one of these things that coincides with the fact that this pandemic has been unprecedented in our lifetime, and also it's one-time funding. Next, questions continue about when is Measure E coming. So very quick review. Voters approved Measure E back in November of 2020. It did not go into effect until just a few months ago on April 1st of this year. The first allocation that is collected, that is returned to the city, does not occur until the end of June. And then the next one comes at the end of September. And all that is just a quick review so everyone understands. Even though Measure E was approved, passed in November, it didn't go into effect until April of this year, and we won't be collecting the actual revenue until the end of June. In other words, there have been no Measure E dollars coming to the city since the election, and it won't come until the end of June, basically right before the beginning of this next fiscal year. So here is just a good outline of where we've been recently and where we're headed. As you can recall, not too long ago, we were facing a $9.2 million general fund structural deficit. Back then, that was before we were even aware that there was going to be a pandemic in the following year. We made some very difficult choices. The City Council had to make some very difficult choices, which included shuttering very popular city facilities, as well as laying off public employees. We were able to cut $5.3 million, both in permanent and ongoing cuts. And we prepared to propose a status quo budget for this current year. And then, of course, the coronavirus hit, and we took an $8.4 million loss in revenues in the last fiscal year. And there was a COVID recession. Uh, Unfortunately, in that year, it cratered our revenues, and a lot of the progress that we'd been making was simply halted. And I want to remind folks, we were making good, steady progress. We still have a long ways to go, and that'll be a different presentation in terms of where this organization is at. Hope to make that presentation at a later time. And then we're moving towards recovery, of course, with Measure E. And we did receive some CARES Act funding up to, I think it was $3.9 million. And of course, as we were in this financial crater here, we were making progress here, climbing out. COVID knocks us back down. Here we are slowly climbing out thanks to Measure E. Measure E is kind of like, a jetpack to help us really get back to equal, but also to make improvements. So that, we were hoping that would accelerate the city's overall recovery. But of course, then we have the Measure N passage and the IUF lawsuit. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that really, it's still predominantly sunny. Those measures only cause partial clouding. It's predominantly sunny outlook for this city, for this community. So it only slows down our progress. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But going forward, we're looking at, as we recover with the rest of the country and the economy, Measure E, we project at this point, it looks like it's going to be just under $50 million of new revenues. Now, with Measure N, ultimately, there could be a loss over time of up to $236 million. That depends on various things, including court decisions. And we're also, because of the IUF lawsuit, the general fund has to transfer $36.5 million back to the enterprise funds. And I'll talk about that a little bit more too. Okay, so again, back to the overall good news though, and it's mostly sunny in Oxnard with regard to our budget. The year-over-year deficits and cuts are over, and it allows us to start to restore programs and services that this community wants, needs, and deserves, and it allows us to do so at a pace that is hopefully manageable and meet the expectations of the city council's policies, and especially their recently reestablished or updated, I shouldn't say reestablished, updated city council priorities. So overview, we're going to go over the big picture of what's coming in this year in restoring services and programs. We'll look mostly at the general fund. We'll take a quick look at all funds proposed. And then in terms of Measure O, that's holding steady. We are working on a Measure O weaning process, which we actually started over a year ago, because Measure O sunsets on the natural in 2029. Of course, with Measure N, that date may or may not change, and we're still waiting to see how the courts come down on that. So our overall goal here for this upcoming budget is restoration. And I want to give everyone this reminder that we witnessed a year ago. A lot can change during a year. So just keep in mind, the budget is a living document. It's a policy document by the council, but external forces such as a pandemic or, knock on wood, earthquakes or things like that never happen, but they would obviously force us to change course. So city council priorities, when I mean the council updated it, the last round of priorities was established for 2016 through 2020. So here they are. I'm going to rest on this screen for just a moment. You can see essentially 5 categories, 5 elements of each category: quality of life, economic development, public safety, infrastructure and natural resources, and organizational effectiveness. the bulk of this is restoration, and then some of it are new things that the city council aspires to add in order to improve the quality of life for everyone in Oxnard. And then, so that's the yellowish highlight here. And then anything that's encircled are items that we believe when we get to constructing them, we can utilize bonds rather than paying the full price upfront. So my vision for what we're doing here, especially with regards to Measure E, is we're looking at a 3-year phase here. So I consider this upcoming budget the first of 3 restoration budgets. And we're sort of planning out a long-term, although 3 years, but a longer term strategy. We're not only looking out at this upcoming year, we're looking ahead at the following 2 years. And the general themes are in this upcoming year, we're looking to restore services and programs. Next year, we will continue to restore, but we will also start some more improvements. Some improvements will happen in this year. And then in the third year out, we will really begin to see not only continued restorations, continued improvements, but we'll start to see signs of many of the things that we want to add. Now, some of this is fluid, and in the first year, while we're focusing on restorations, you're going to see some improvements, and in the next year, while we're focusing on furthering restorations and beginning some improvements, you may see some of the addition. It's just there's going to be a fluid timeline in terms of the kinds of projects we take on. So just keep that in mind. But the point of all of this is to say even though we have Measure E, we cannot restore and do everything in 1 year. It's not possible for so many reasons and would not be rational, logical, wouldn't make sense. So we're not going to pretend like everything's going to be peachy keen a year from now. Now, just examples of the things we're going to restore. Here are 2 key examples over the last, and since 2015. You can see lots of cuts have been taken in cultural and community services as well as in the police department, and this is true across the board with all the city departments. But these are just some of the more public examples, and this is the kind of thing that the council wants us to start restoring, and we intend to do so. Now, what are the few negative budget impacts? And I just want to review this because it's just a reality. It's happening. It is what it is. We just have to manage through this. But with regard to the IUF law, Mr. Starr's IUF lawsuit, it's going to require us to return to the enterprise funds, the utilities, $36.5 million from the general fund. But it also stops the annual $4 million transfer from the utilities into the streets fund to repair streets. Now, this is in court in terms of, now this, by the way, it's the facts are what they are. We did lose this in court, which is why this refund is required, and that's fine. What we're doing, though, is trying to get somewhat of a payment schedule from the court. So until the court rules on that, we don't know how much of this we have to do and how fast. So we're looking for, hopefully, several years to repay it, and that will impact future budgets. So when the court rules on that, we'll abide. Now, I don't want to get too far into this here, but I think it's correct that the IUF fund fee needs to be adjusted correctly so that there's a clear nexus to the cost. I don't agree that it can't be done at all. And I think there certainly could be a better way of fixing this, but unfortunately, that's where we are. Likewise, with Measure N, which in my mind, as your city manager, requires excessive spending on roads, um, or the way it's structured. If you don't go all out on roads, you're going to also lose Measure O. I don't think that's the proper way to make any improvements in Oxnard. And the reason I say that it's excessive is because the road quality standard it requires is much higher than almost everywhere else in California. And while it might be a nice thing it would come at the expense of a lot of services and programs across the city that we also need and want. But those decisions are in the hands of the city council in terms of juggling and balancing what the budget provides for. All right, so um, having said all that, Measure E is not, while it is basically saving this city, it isn't a do everything, it's not a magic wand. So there are limitations. So just very quickly, we have again the IUF lawsuit repayments. There, you see the asterisk here because that really depends on the court's rulings, but we could be looking at paying back 5 years, 5 million a year for over 8 years. Most recent news from the judge is that's not likely, so it's likely to be a much shorter time frame, which means we would have to readjust, and we will do so. The improved streets pavements, what we're looking at this point is about a $14.6 million investment a year over the next 3 years. And you see there's a double asterisk there, and that's because it's possible that we can bond for 2/3 of that, because that would be the construction portion of repairing our streets. Our capital improvement projects for this coming year, 8.8 million. We're looking at putting 5.6 million into parks, but that's also medians and trees. It's not just parks alone, it's also medians and trees. And we are hopefully for the final time resolving the city's structural deficit. So that's going to require 2 million, and that's one time and done. And we've made a policy decision to pursue the ambulance services contract. 3 asterisks there because that is also pending a court decision that may or may not go forward. So after the required payments here, as well as the large investments in streets maintenance, capital improvement projects, and parks and medians and trees. These, by the way, all those categories are large, broad categories that reflect trying to catch up with years and years of deferred maintenance. But with Measure E, we finally have the ability to do it, and we look forward to doing it. But with that, we're looking at the balance of a positive $10.7 million to spread across the remainder of the departments. And while that looks like a small number as compared to the full amount of Measure E, remember, all of it is additional revenue. This is money we didn't have last year, the year before that, and so on. So again, for the first time, we're not facing cuts, we're not facing deficits. We have the financial resources now to do things in the proper way and to provide services and programs at adequate levels. And hopefully, as we move forward, we'll continue to improve. Again, all good news, mostly sunny in Oxnard. Now, some of the major investments, restoring parks, medians, and trees, again, just over 5.5 million. Restoring our streets, and this is looking at 4.6 over the next 3 years. We can bond for about 2/3 of that, so the actual upfront cost on the city will be lower per year. But the point is, this is what we would need to spend to hit the targets that the council has decided on. And same with the capital improvement programs. We have a very long list. If you have ever followed the capital improvement project item at the council or reviewed the capital improvement project book, you can see the long list of deferred maintenance. And again, all these things are not unique to Oxnard. Many cities struggle with this. That's another story. I can talk about that if anybody wants to ask me why that is when we get to the meeting. Right, so here we come, some highlights. So again, this is becoming redundant, but these are the major investments, and this is what everyone told us in the surveys that they really wanted for Measure E. So once again, street and alley repairs, parks, landscape, and trees, as well as a lot of other physical capital asset improvement program projects. So that looks to be total proposed changes increased from 12.4 to 27.4. So we are more than doubling this investment to make the city look better and also be better. For police, in the first year, we're working towards restoring neighborhood policing. The changes in their budget are from 62.8 to 70.8, and a lot of that is to adjust for the appropriate funding for callbacks hours and night differential payment. In this first budget, we're not looking for new sworn officers, but we are adding a couple of FTEs inside the department in the administration somewhere, civilian positions. We're also paying for new portable radios and re-upping for the body-worn cameras. There is, well, I think that's sort of obvious that all police departments need to continue with that program, and we shall continue as well. Fire. Fire is focusing on, in addition to the potential of the new ambulance program, again, pending the court outcome. Fire is looking to run yet a new academy. The next one will have 21 recruits. We are very down in actual numbers of firefighters. There's a lot of needs at the fire department to improve services. And we are also looking for replacement of the fire trucks. And in this upcoming budget, we're looking to bond for 3 replacement fire engines. The academy is something that I'm particularly looking to fix in the fire department's budget, because in prior years, I don't know why this happened, but the fire department budget never included a line item for academies, and I just find that to be it just doesn't make sense to me. So we're fixing some structural problems in the fire department's budget, and we have to catch up, similar to the police department that needs to catch up on filling vacancies of sworn officers. We also have to catch up on having a steady stream of firefighters for our department. So their budget increase potentially could go from 20.5 to 31.6 million. Again, that final number is pending the court's outcome with regard to the ambulance program. Cultural and community service, lots of restorations there in order to restore services to the community. A couple of highlights in the senior programs. We're looking to restore the senior center hours in the Colonia neighborhood. We want to reopen Durley Park Youth Center. We want to restore the full hours at the Colonia basketball gym, also including hours at the boxing gym. But we are waiting for health department clearance for youth boxing programs to start up again, because that is such a high contact sport. Overall, oh, and then City Core, we're going to restore some of that budget up to $260,000. And overall, we are adding back 8 staff positions across all the divisions of cultural and community service, including 2 for the library. And we're also adding funding back for digital services as well as the library book budget. So, sorry. So it's a increase from 9.8 million to 13.4 in restorations for community services. Housing, what we're going to do there is beef up the homeless programs. We're going to add 1 position for our housing or homeless programs, as well as some funding to kick off the Housing First plan. We are also going to focus on redevelopment and neighborhood improvement with the housing department, as well as the continuing with the Oxnard employee pipeline. So we're looking at overall, it looks to be 4 new positions across the housing department, and that increases from 400 to 2.1 million. And then what I consider many of the internal departments, city attorney, city manager, finance, billing, licensing, community development, human resources, and also information technology, which isn't on the screen because it's a purely internal service fund department, but I'll touch on it. So very quickly, city attorney, we're going to add 2 deputy city attorneys and 1 administrative legal secretary, or maybe that's a paralegal. I don't know the correct term these days. In the city manager's office, I'm going to add 1 project manager and 1 communications coordinator. In finance, we're adding a senior financial analyst as well as 1 accounting temp labor, some funding for that, as well as a new procurement buyer. In billing and licensing, we're going to add 1 customer service rep and also be conducting business license inspections, and we're also going to fund some security upgrades in that department. Community development, we're restoring a total of 6 people. We're also going to add funding for professional contracts, and we will be implementing the Measure F, the Permit Simplicity Self-Certification program. HR, we are going to add 2 human resources technicians and 1 human resources analyst. Actually, no, that's a reclass. And then we're doing investments in workers' comp and public liability efforts. And then in terms of IT, which is not on this slide here, we are definitely adding a cybersecurity officer. That's a position that doesn't exist right now, and I'm going to focus on that in this upcoming year. We also are adding 6 staff people there to support many of the needs across the city and to also beef up our IT security protocols. And we also need to make an investment of nearly $1 million in terms of replacement hardware as well as updating our software. I'm happy to talk about those in detail at the meeting if anybody is curious about those. But across the board, you can see we're restoring and adding across the internal departments. So here is the snapshot of what we project to be our revenues and our expenses in the upcoming year. So you can see here, we've got on the revenue side, we've got property tax, sales tax, and then the Bradley Burns portion of the sales tax, but it's all sales tax here. There's some other non-tax revenues, hotel tax, also known as transient occupancy, TOT, business license tax, and all that adds up to just over $200 million. And on the expenses, we're proposing just under that, but you can see this really hasn't changed much over the years in terms of the share of the pie. But we are, again, as we make restorations, the dollar amount for each of these departments will be increasing. So, and by the way, when you're reviewing this video, remember, I should have said this at the outset, but you can certainly press pause to view these slides. And then in terms of the all funds, when you look at the entire city budget, we're just looking at, what we've been reviewing is predominantly the general fund here. And that is because primarily that is where the city council has complete ability to dictate where the investments are made. With regard to the enterprise funds, the utilities, they can only be used for the things that those utilities need. So the discretion is in the bulk of the budget, but not all of it. So I want to talk a little bit because I can foretell there will be questions or critiques about why are we hiring people, and the sort of there it is, Measure E is just going into salaries and pensions, and I just want to confront that head on. It is people that provide services and programs and keep the city running on a daily basis. And so what we have here is sort of it's a depiction of the gears of the city that keep it running. And on the exterior is where you see the bulk of the departments that as residents and businesses you experience, right? Our police officers, our firefighters, code enforcement, our development workers, a lot of our public works employees, a lot of our cultural and community service employees, some of our housing employees. Those are the folks you interact with um, in the community. But to make all of that work, there are, of course, internal departments that keep the gears of the operation running. Uh, very important. All of these very important. All of these external facing departments, they cannot do what they do, and they certainly can't do it well unless all the internal departments are able to do what we need to do and also to do it well. So part of what we have to do here to deliver all the restorations and improvements and additions that the city council has provided me direction to do requires us to restore staffing, internal and external departments to deliver those services. But again, um, all the external folks that you interact with require all the internal folks to help make things work. So I hope people can appreciate this, and it isn't just about police or fire or public works or community services. There's a lot of work. You can think of it as the back office. There's a lot of work that has to happen in the back office to make everything else function as well. Now, another way I want to depict this is, so here's where we are. And if you think of these are the workers of City Hall, and this is the services and programs that we carry, deliver, transport to the community. This is where we are. It's not a lot, and this is what thankfully for Measure E, this is what the community through the city council has instructed us to begin to do. So kind of get back to where we were and also make it better. So of course, our response is, oh no, too much. Because it is a lot of work. It's good work, and it's work that we want to rise to the challenge of, and we want to not only meet but exceed the expectations. But to do so, we need more of us to deliver the programs and services. So that's just a simple way to depict, if you want us to carry a heavier load, we also want to do that. We're just going to need to restore the staff to do it. And by the way, it isn't all restoring staff. In here are also things like equipment, supplies, software, hardware, various consulting contracts. So it isn't just, we're not just restoring here with more staff. It's also in here to go along with the services and programs. So again, as a reminder, this is what my vision as your city manager. This is simply the first of 3 restoration budgets. The general theme is in this upcoming year, let's restore, let's work hard, let's make the city look better, let's start to restore the services and programs. Next year, we'll continue restoration, but we'll also see more even improvements, and improvements is on top of restoration. Again, it's fluid. You'll see some of that. Some improvements start already. It's not, we're not saying no improvements will happen this coming year. We're just simply focused on restoration. And then 3 years out, we should hopefully be able to see some of the things that the city council wants us to add. Again, you may see some of that in year 2 as well. So keep that in mind. It's just, I've got a 3-year horizon here in terms of the full restoration improvements and additions. So that's the end of this preview. If anyone is interested in, if you hadn't had the chance in the prior couple of years to go through the basic understanding of a municipal fiscal budget, you can stay on, and there's a bonus to this presentation, which is a snapshot of Budgeting 101. So very quickly, in terms of municipal budgets, you can think of, when we talk about funds and revenue, you can think of funds as the same as accounts, and revenue is money. Examples of major city funds. So what we talked about was the general fund. We also have the enterprise funds, water, sewer, and trash. And then we also have our special districts, whether they're LMDs, CFDs, um, and other various special districts that other cities have that we don't, but they're also special districts. But that's essentially the variety of funds that make up a city budget. So where do your property taxes go? And this is often confusing because people, and I think it's a simple assumption to make that the property tax that you pay in the city where you live goes to the city where you live. But only 17.6% of it actually goes directly, or I should say comes back directly to the city where you live. 56.3% of it goes to the schools via the state, 20.3% goes to the county, and 5.8% goes to other county districts. So again, for every dollar that you pay on property tax, believe it or not, only 17.6% comes back for city services. Where do our sales taxes go? Very similar. People think that, whatever your sales tax rate is right now, again, thanks to Measure E, it's 9.25, that the city gets 9.25, when in fact we don't. So sales tax is divvied up across California. So the state gets the lion's share, almost 4%. County realignment programs, just over 1.5%. And then we get the balance, although I don't think it's the entirety of it. And now this screen is so small, I can't see the last topic here. Let me look on paper. But so there's the base 1% that every city gets. And then there is the newly approved Measure E, which is 1.50 cents. There's the existing Measure O, which has half a penny. And then there's Prop 172 is a half a penny. And then there's something at a quarter of a penny, but I can't see the fine print. Sorry, I have the wrong strength glasses on. My apologies. Anyway, but my point is the entire amount of the sales tax has never come to the city where you pay the sales tax. It's divvied up across the state. Now, there's more information about sales tax that's important, which is there's a state maximum limit that any local city can charge, and that limit, I believe, is 10.25. And there are a handful of cities in California that are already at that amount. There are a bunch of cities that are lower than that, and there's a bunch of cities that are at the base amount, which is 7.25. Again, they all get the 1% automatically. And then if the local jurisdiction doesn't increase like we've been able to do here, thanks to the voters, then we get to keep the delta, the difference. So all of these additional amounts here actually come back to the city of Oxnard. These amounts here will never get divvied up among the state and the county. And this is why I was so motivated to do this, because it guarantees this amount will always come back to Oxnard and never be divvied up among the state and the county. And part of the reason I wanted to do that was in the minimum and maximum limit between 7.25 and 10.25, it's always possible that the state can pass a new tax that fills part of that gap, and that money then would go to the state. So this is a very, very solid way to ensure local control of our sales tax dollars. So I'm really glad that we did that. And this community will see the benefits of Measure E in the coming year and in the following years. That is my commitment to this community and to the city council. So in terms of restricted revenues, also that make up the city budget, but cannot be used for general fund purposes. So again, the enterprise funds are various utilities, any grants that we receive. So a good example is we were successful in getting a state grant, $8.5 million for Campus Park. That money can only be used in Campus Park, for Campus Park. We applied for a grant for that purpose, and we can only use it for that purpose. Next, you have the gas tax. That money can only be used for our streets and right away. Unfortunately, it cannot be used for our alleyways, but it can be used for our streets. Gas tax is a category that I'm actually worried about in terms of the future of cities, not just us, the future of cities as society makes a shift towards electric vehicles. That's another conversation we need to have sooner or later. Then you have your assessment districts, your LMDs, and your CFDs. Those funds are collected specific for those properties and can only be used in those neighborhoods. It cannot be used elsewhere. And then bond proceeds, when we go for bonds, for example, we do a bond to build an aquatic center, those bond proceeds can't be used for, say, fixing streets or fixing trees or maintaining trees. It's to be used for what we want out for the bond for. And reserves. So reserves is essentially our rainy day fund, and the city council establishes what our goals are, and we have to do our best to meet those goals. So currently, the city council policy for the general fund reserve is 12%. I'm happy to say that in this upcoming year, we can improve on that. We're going to be, I think, above 16%. So that gives me a little bit more comfort. In our utilities, the goals there are 25%. And right now we're currently over, but as we do the capital improvement projects and make the repairs and continue with the progress, especially in the water department, we will eat into those reserves. And they're there not just for a rainy day fund, but for also to save up money to do the construction and repair work that's needed. So that's the end. That's a very short budgeting, municipal budgeting 101. I hope that helps a little bit. Thank you very much.